Hello everyone, Professor Toybox here, along with Darth Vader, and today I'm going to finish my Death Star Derby racetrack. There's really not much left to do. We just need to add the TIE fighters and the vehicle weapon generators. And we'll start with the vehicle weapon generators. So I'll show you the placement of those. Now, you do not want to place any before this ramp that leads up to the terrain that we're going to be driving on, because again this is sitting over top of the main track. And what I find usually happens is that when vehicles are hit, the game frequently wants to respawn them on the main track below. And so if you place a vehicle weapon generator out here before the ramp, or if you place them up here on the terrain that we're driving on, and you place those, the vehicles will use them, and when they're hit, the game will snap them down here to the main track, and the cars will disappear, and it just causes problems. So there are no vehicle weapon generators along here anywhere, through the corridors, the hangar, or anything along here. You want to keep those out of this area. But once you come down here off of that cliff, you're now back on the main track. And so the first thing I do when you get up to the top of this hill is I go ahead and put some vehicle weapon generators along here. And this is where I put the placement. And this makes the trench a little bit more interesting, because the Death Star trench is just a very long, straight, kind of boring stretch of road. And this makes that a little bit more interesting. And I've already hooked these up and placed them. I'm just showing you where I've placed them. Again, you have to set the property to turn them on, and I've shown you how to do that in previous episodes. So there you go. And then you've got weapons as you're driving through this long trench. And then I've got a second set of weapon generators up here as you come up out of the trench. And so those are sitting right over here, right before these towers. And you can kind of see the placement of those. And again, that makes this upper area a bit more interesting. So those are the only weapon generators that I've got, and that's really all that you need. With all the features on this course, that's sufficient. Now the last track feature we have on this course are the TIE fighters here near the end. And to save time, I've already placed the creativitoys that we're going to need. So I've dropped a trigger area right here at the top of the ramp leading out of the trench. We're going to use that to trigger the TIE fighters. And I've got another trigger area over here near the starting line, right before the finish. I've placed that right here. So there's the starting line. Here's the trigger area at the bottom of that ramp. We're going to use that to end the TIE fighters and remove them from the toy box. And then for the TIE fighters, the Star Destroyer is what generates those. And I've placed this up here. I'll try to give you a good look at where I place this. You can kind of judge by the shadow on the screen. You can kind of judge from the edges of the bounding box here. I'll try to give you a good look at that. You don't have to place it again exactly where I've placed mine, but you want it somewhere in that area. I wanted to make sure that it was not visible from the trench as you're driving along the trench, because in the original Star Wars movie you couldn't see a Star Destroyer up there. So as you're driving through the trench, we just want to see the stars. And so that's why that's off to the left over there, out of sight. And also as you pass through this trigger area and it generates those, that gives the TIE fighters time to start flying down. So that by the time you get to this curve, it's about when they're going to intercept you. And let's go ahead and look at the properties for the Star Destroyer here. So if we open up the logic menu and look at the properties, the default number of TIE fighters is 2, and I left that at 2. You don't really need more than that. I suppose if you want to make it a little bit more challenging, you can put down more than 2, but 2 is really enough. You don't need too much more. So you just start pounding the racers with laser blasts from a bazillion TIE fighters, they're never going to be able to get out of there, so 2 is sufficient. And we're going to use this trigger area once again to set that off. So on the trigger area, we'll do a new logic connection when entered. And again, we'll key this off of player 1, just to keep it simple. And if the other player is lagging behind player 1, then there won't be any TIE fighters more than likely up here. We'll go ahead and start the TIE fighters. So passing through that trigger area starts the TIE fighters. And then passing through this trigger area down here at the bottom of the slope, once they're back inside the Death Star, you don't really need the TIE fighters. And so coming through this trigger area, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player 1. We'll come back up to the Star Destroyer and stop it. And so that way, as you go back inside the Death Star, you won't have these TIE fighters trying to harass you from outside. And again, if you've got player 2 lagging behind player 1, by the time they get up here, player 1 passes through that trigger area and the TIE fighters disappear. That's okay. Player 2's lagging behind anyway, so they're going to need to catch up. And so taking that obstacle out will kind of help them a little bit with that. If it's the other way around and player 2 is racing on ahead, then well, they have an advantage because they're ahead of player 1. Depending on how far ahead they are, if they're only ahead a little ways, then when player 1 passes through here, those TIE fighters will immediately start hammering on them. So that's a good thing. That slows down player 2 a little bit. If player 1 is lagging really far behind, then player 2 just gets a free pass. So some incentive for player 2, I guess, to get on ahead of them. But anyway, with that, the Death Star Derby is done, and so is this series. I only built 5 tracks for my Toy Box Racing Cup. I could build more, but the tracks would contain the same basic features that I've already done, and I don't want to repeat what you've already seen. My purpose for this series was to share some tips and tricks for taking your toy box races to the next level, and to provide examples of what you could do with those techniques. At this point, I feel I've done that, and you have all the tools you need to build some exciting racetracks of your own with some spectacular features. In the future, if I come up with some fresh ideas for new features, I may revisit this series and add some additional tracks, but for now this series is done. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed my Toy Box Racing series. If you did, leave a comment before you go, and let me know what features you liked best out of all the racetracks I built. Next week I'll be starting 2 brand new series. My Avengers Age of Ultron adventure begins Monday, and this Friday I'll post the trailer for my Toy Story series that will air on Fridays for a little while. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, be sure you do that before you leave so you don't miss these fun new toy boxes. Take care.